My wife cheated on me once. Once was enough. I'm sure she thought she had everything under control and was very surprised by how I handled the situation. The course of events was the usual one. We had been married for 15 years, and things had become pretty boring. We distanced ourselves, spending time in the same house, under the same roof, but in different rooms. She had drifted away from me. At some point, I noticed that we were no longer partners, nor confidants, nor lovers. She left too many clues. I did some investigating, and it turned out that she was having an affair, at least emotionally. She started complaining to me, which was normal, and I stopped listening to her complaints and lies for years. Now, with this new evidence, I didn't just hear her. I listened to her. She was unhappy with our marriage, and it was clear to me that she no longer loved me. If I tried to argue that she was wrong, that we could fix our love, that I loved her, and we could repair our marriage, she simply moved further away from me. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I saw another bridge between us collapsing. With all this, I told myself. Finishing my beer, I replayed our last argument over and over in my head. I tried to find a way to win her back. After all, she was mine. It seemed to me that every time I tried to get her back, she moved further away from me. I sat up late that night, letting my wife sleep in our big family bed while I cradled my wounded feelings. At some point, my brain clicked, and a new way of thinking exploded within me. Why was I arguing with her about how she felt? Seriously? At that moment, I realized that everything my wife was telling me was true. A truth I could not ignore or contradict. She was telling me how she felt, and here I was arguing with her, telling her she was wrong, that she really didn't feel those feelings. How stupid was that? How can you tell someone they are wrong about their feelings? Well, that was over immediately. What she felt was what she felt. So, why argue about it? And I felt strange. No, actually it was strange. Because while I was sitting on the couch in the dark, thinking about my recent relationship with my wife, I realized I was also unhappy. I wasn't sure if I still loved her. I was in love with the idea of staying together, of being married to my loving wife. But that wasn't the reality. This moment of revelation hit me. It took me a while to piece everything together, but now I had a plan of action. Whether it worked or not, at that moment I didn't care. Because now I knew that what I was doing and what she was doing wasn't working. What does that mean? The definition of madness is trying to do the same thing that didn't work, thinking over and over that it will work. I smiled as I threw the beer bottles in the trash and decided to sleep in the guest bedroom. It's all part of the plan. Linda opened the door to the guest bedroom and turned on the light to keep me awake. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room?" she asked. I squinted against the light until my eyes adjusted. I stayed up late. "I didn't want to bother you," I said. She looked at me and then went to the kitchen to get some coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, as I've been blessed with the ability to wake up and be alert immediately. I jumped into the shower and got ready for a confrontation. Today, I had a spring in my step. Linda sat across from me in the living room. I was in my usual position on the couch. Linda clenched her fists, looking worried, and I felt she was preparing to say something. "Frank, this isn't working. I feel disappointed and confused, and I don't think I love you anymore." I sat and looked at her. She paused, then continued. "Frank, I know we've been together for a long time, but I think we need a divorce." The word hung in the air. I smiled as she looked at me nervously. "That sounds fine, darling," I said. She blinked. "Frank, did you hear me?" I nodded. "Yes, of course I heard you. You don't feel like everything is working. You don't love me. You want a divorce. I agree. Do you understand now?" She was alarmed. I stood up and approached her. I knelt in front of her. "Linda, I can't change how you feel. You don't love me. How could I object to that? I could tell you you're wrong. No, you don't love me." "Well, to be honest, there were many times in our lives when I didn't love you either. If you feel you can't live with me anymore, well, how can I argue with that?" Linda looked at me as if I were crazy. However, deep down I could see that she was nodding, acknowledging my sharp ability to understand that what she said was true, and she appreciated it. "Wait, you said you didn't love me?" she asked. "There were times, just like yours," I replied. She looked a little concerned, and all the time she had played out this little scene in her head, she never expected me to react the way I did. I loved seeing her emotions reflected on her face. "Well," I said, "something else. I have to go tonight, so I'd like to resolve this now, if you don't mind." "Are you leaving now?" I stood up and started putting on my jacket, preparing to leave. No, Frank. Where are you going?" "I'm leaving. I think I'll go to a few bars. I think I might start looking for someone else instead of you." At that moment, I waved goodbye and left her sitting in her chair, mouth agape. I stopped at the right bar, grabbed a bourbon, and sat at one of the tables away from the crowd. I pulled out my cell phone and set another part of my plan in motion. I called my friend from work, Jessica, who worked with me in my department and was known as the company gossip. Playing the role of the poor abandoned husband, I solemnly relayed the conversation I had with my wife, especially how she surprised me with a divorce request. The real reason I called her wasn't the one I told her I was at the bar drowning my sorrows in whiskey and might not show up for work the next day. I could hear the wheels turning in her head because Jessica and we were flirting. I told her I needed help while I was in such an emotionally fragile situation. I met Jessica at a bar I knew my wife and her friends frequented. I was worried someone might see me. No, my marriage seemed over. My wife didn't love me, and frankly at this point, I didn't love my wife, Linda. Jessica looked great, arrived quickly, well dressed. Maybe she wanted to get there before anyone else had a chance. At least that's what I wanted to believe. But when she saw me, she was a little surprised to see that my body language and mood didn't match the news I'd given her on the phone. Not even my smile helped. "Frank, what's going on?" She sat beside me with a somber expression on her face. I raised my hand and pointed to my ring finger. "No, not. She wants the divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight this?" I called the waiter and ordered another drink. Jessica ordered her usual Cosmo. "Frank, on the phone you sounded more affected." "Yes, we haven't been happy for a while. I finally realized I might not love her like I used to. She wants this divorce from me. So you know what? I'm not gonna fight it. She wants to leave, fine. I'm not going to lie. Just forgotten. No love." Jessica took a long sip of her cocktail. She stared at me. Now I realized I was influencing this woman, regardless of my feelings about it. I noticed I was confusing her. "Maybe we can dance." I didn't wait for her reply. I simply took her hand and led her to the dance floor. "Frank, what are you gonna do?" I hugged her tighter. "I'll give her everything she thinks she wants. I'll do what I please right now. I want to dance with you. In fact, I've wanted to dance with you for a long time. Can I do that?" She looked into my eyes and smiled. "If you're trying to get revenge on her..." I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe." She pressed her whole body against mine. It felt good, warm. "It suits me," she sighed. We lost track of time. It was so nice not to have to worry about calling home to tell Linda when I would be back. Jessica was fun, smart, and flirted with me all night. She was completely mine. She knew it. I knew it. But I didn't take her home with me. Although it was nice knowing someone wanted me, my wife had wounded my ego, and Jessica was supporting it. Plus, I'd say Jessica was a more attractive woman than Linda. We kissed in the parking lot next to her car. I opened the door and smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow at work," she nodded. I made it clear I needed to have fun right now, and had no intention of clinging to another woman. Minutes later, I subtly felt that Jessica understood I was now looking for someone for me. I'm sure that by the end of tomorrow's workday, all the women in the office would know about it. I'd like to say I'm a laid-back guy, but the truth is, I was anxiously waiting to rub some of this in Linda's face. "Where have you been?" Linda attacked me when I came into the house. I was in bed, but as soon as she heard me enter, she came out to see me. I hung my coat in the wardrobe. I was walking, and I said, I told you I was leaving. Why should you worry? I, Frank, was a little worried that something bad might have happened to her. I smiled at her. Linda, I understand how you feel. It's fine with me. Do you want a divorce? I'll gladly give you the divorce. I grabbed the pillow and the clothes the next morning and headed to the guest room. Frank, Linda called me hesitantly. I stopped, transferring my things to the other hand. She lowered her eyes, unable to look me in the face. I don't understand this. I mean, you don't have to sleep in a different bed. Are you suggesting you'll sleep in another bed? You'll move out of our bedroom? I didn't want to make it easy for her. She cried and wiped a tear. I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share my bed. I mean, if you want. If you don't want that, well, I guess I could move to another room. She was excited. The idea of suddenly moving out of her bedroom was something she never expected. She held her breath, fearing I'd force her to do exactly that. I ended her agony. Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you if it doesn't cause you too many problems. Her face lit up. Oh yes, it will be wonderful. I mean, it's no problem for me. All right then, I said and threw the pillow back onto the bed. She wanted to talk, but I was too tired and told her to go to sleep. We'll have time to talk later. And indeed, by the next night, 3 more women at work had proposed marriage to me. I even had a friend give me his sister's number. She was a widow and had trouble finding someone to date. I scheduled dates for the next week with all 4 girls and repeated with Jessica. I intentionally left this night free because I needed to talk to Linda. We needed to resolve everything. I guess she needed to live her life. I returned home and found Linda there. Carol saw you last night at the bar. She said you were with a woman. Who was she? What did you do together? Carol said they were very comfortable with each other. I could have yelled at her, scolded her for talking to other men, for neglecting me, for drifting away from me, but I didn't. I smiled and told her I'd answer her questions after changing. She tried to challenge me, but I ignored her and went to change into comfortable clothes. As I relaxed, I noticed Linda staring at me intently. She was ready to fight. Her eyes were on the verge of tears, but her body was tense with anger. Was it Jessica from work? I said without denying it. I'm sure she thought I'd start twisting, but I didn't. What did you do together? She asked, accusing. I looked at her and simply said, We were on a date. A date? She exclaimed. I nodded and still sat calmly in my seat. You have no right, we're married. What makes you think you can do this? I stood up, grabbed a drink from the kitchen, and sat back down. She was still standing, staring at me, waiting for my answer. Why should you care? I asked. She looked at me with her mouth open. We're married. Do you want a divorce? She nodded, unsure, with her voice trembling. You said you didn't love me, right? I said I'm not in love with you, she corrected me. And I agree with you. You're not in love with me. So why wouldn't I look for love elsewhere? Do you want the divorce? You don't love me. What do I get out of that? What incentive do I have to stay here with you? She sat down, almost sinking into her chair. What will people say? Don't you understand how this looks right now? Carol is talking all over town about my husband going out with other people. Don't you dare call Jessica a bad woman? She growled. A perfect lady, and I was a gentleman. Last night she deliberately went out with a married man. I call that cheating a woman. So I said angrily, standing up and walking around the room in front of her, She's single. And if she's a woman who cheats, how would you call a married woman who goes out with other men behind her husband's back? Linda stared at me, unable to say anything. I saw how her thoughts worked, how much she knew. She panicked. What does this have to do with me? She exploded. Just look at me. Time passed endlessly. I stayed silent. She saw it on my face. She knew. Her body started trembling. How much do you know? I screamed. If you're making love with them, I really don't care. You see, honey, this marriage ended when you decided to take me out of the game. I'm not going to cry over it. I'm moving on. I'll take care of myself since I get no support from my wife at home. I got up and went to the kitchen. Dinner wasn't ready, so I decided to make something for myself. She can cook for herself. A little later, she came into the kitchen and watched me finish my dinner. "I'm so sorry," she said. I put away the dishes and turned to her. "I'm sorry too. I think you should know I have plans for the rest of the week, so don't expect me to come home early. If you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room." She didn't answer me. I went upstairs to go to bed. I decided to sleep in the guest room. I'm sure Linda didn't sleep well. After work, I met Christina, a pretty blonde around 35 years old, divorced, with 2 kids. We chatted over coffee and did something a little silly. I took her to play laser tag, a tactical military team game using safe laser guns and sensors that register impacts. The sensors are placed on vests, helmets, or headbands. Yes, it was us 2 adults against 10 teenagers who attacked and destroyed us at the beginning of each game. Christina loved it, and I enjoyed sitting and talking with her afterward, waiting for the next game to begin. At some point during the last game, we both got killed and fell next to each other, pretending to be dead. I grabbed her toward me while we were there and kissed her. She kissed me back. Then we had a nice dinner, and soon I took her back to her house where we said goodbye with another kiss. Another confrontation awaited me with Linda when I returned, but strangely, she was calm. "Hi," she said. I smiled and greeted her as I undressed. "Seems like you had fun," she commented, keeping her emotions hidden. "Yes, thanks for noticing. How was your afternoon?" We talked for the first time in months. We sat and talked until late into the night. She listened to me and I listened to her. "I never made love to anyone else, Frank, I swear," she admitted. "I kissed several men and shared my thoughts and feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more from me, but I wasn't ready." "Linda, I'm sure we both are guilty of this, but even though there's no love with anyone else, you still cheated on me. We were a team. I'm glad you stopped before cheating on me. You came to ask me for a divorce. I respect you for that. I should have listened to your feelings instead of starting a fight with you." "Yes," she agreed. We sat in silence for a while. "Frank, I'm confused right now. I don't know if I want the divorce." I smiled. "You'll let me know when you figure it out. I'm not throwing you out of the house, and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon." I had already gotten up and was about to go to bed. "Are you still going out with Jessica?" "Yes. I'm going out with her and other people as well. Do whatever you want. Solve it. I have to do what's best for me. If we get divorced, well then, it wasn't meant to be." I headed to the guest room. She followed me and stood in the doorway. I turned to look at her as I took off my shirt. "Come to bed with me, please," she cried, tears falling from her eyes. "I don't know. I just want you right now." I held out my hands, and she threw herself into them, starting to sob. She was confused, didn't know what to feel. I took her back to our bed and held her while we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. She was a fan, and we always talked about the latest television shows and fan things. We were at a bar with live music she had been wanting to visit, but none of her friends or dates were interested that night. So I took her with me. We had fun. Although we had flirted from time to time at work, there was absolutely no chemistry between us as a romantic couple. We had fun, but we were just friends. That was enough for both of us, and I got home early. I parked in front of the house and found a car parked at the entrance. My jealousy flared for a moment, but I calmed myself and reminded myself that everything would be as it would be. It makes no sense, right? I learned this from my psychiatrist when she treated me for my fear of flying. Instead of getting upset and yelling at myself, "Oh my God, I'm going to get on a plane," it made me change my tone to one of excitement and anticipation. "Oh my God, I'm about to get on a plane. I can't wait." This took some practice, but generally, it worked in the short term. Not knowing what to expect, I repeated my mantra and opened the door to find Linda sitting and chatting with Carol, one of her friends. "Frank, I didn't expect you back so early," Linda said. "Carol." I nodded to them. Carol gave me a cold glare but didn't say anything. "Business ended early, so I came back." Do you want some privacy? Linda and Carol exchanged glances, and then Carol stood up from the sofa. I have to go, she said. Linda walked her to the door. Carol gave me a nasty look, didn't say a word, and left. Sorry for barging in. I didn't mean to interrupt your night, I said. Don't be silly, Frank. This is also your home, Linda replied. When was the last time either she or I called this house our home, I asked. Have you eaten? She asked me. She had some leftover food that apparently she and Carol shared. I grabbed the food while she cleaned the kitchen. How are you? I asked. She sat down. I'm fine, I guess, she replied. I invited Carol to talk, but it confused me further. How did you want me to throw you out? Change the locks and divorce you? Well, my key still works, so I guess you didn't have time to call a locksmith. Linda laughed. Don't be silly, I responded. I had to explain to her that I was the one who asked for the divorce after telling you. What rights do I have over you? I left you, right? I asked. She stared me in the eye. That last part was a question I desperately wanted the answer to. I wanted to get up and calm her fears. Tell her she still belonged to me, but I didn't. I said nothing. In the past, my intentions would open her up to that. But maybe this new plan of action would have a different effect on her. Changing the subject, I mentioned the concert. Bad news, I'm afraid. My date for tomorrow night canceled. Now I'm stuck with tickets for the concert. Maybe you want to come with me instead of another girl, I suggested. Her face lit up. Oh, Frank, I'd love to. I mean, if that's what you want, she replied. I shrugged. Well, I can give these tickets to someone from work, I said. No, she said firmly. I'd like to go. Happy to come with you, she added. She blushed and nodded. Yes, she whispered. I smiled. This could be fun, I thought. I told Otter the news. She was disappointed, but that's the way it goes in the dating game. Linda was dressed and ready to go when I picked her up after work. She looked good, dressed to impress. I'm pretty sure she dressed to impress me. I didn't know much about this band, but Jeter suggested I go to this concert, so I bought tickets. They were good, loud, but good. I guess it didn't surprise me when we ran into Jeter. I saw that Linda was surprised at how good Jeter looked, and quickly realized that Jeter would be my date that night. I apologized to Jeter, and she looked at Linda. Jeter, this is Linda. Linda, Jeter, I introduced. Jeter was going to be my date tonight, but something happened. Normally, when I introduced Linda, I always called her my wife, but this time I decided not to, and Linda noticed right away. Jeter, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Mrs. Daniels, said Linda, staring directly into Jeter's eyes. Something happened between the two women. Jeter was smart enough to apologize and said she would see me at work the next day. Linda was full of fury, grabbed my hand. Frank, where's your wedding ring? She asked. I shrugged. At home. I took it off after you asked for the divorce. I don't need it anymore, I responded. Linda was speechless. Again, I had fun keeping her quiet. Frank, we're still not divorced, Linda said. I smiled and focused on the music. Several times I went to the bar to refill our glasses. Every time, Linda watched me like a hawk. Every time I was at the bar, some woman came up and chatted with me for a while. I made one laugh and even got her number. Linda saw all this, but didn't say a word. I'm not really a womanizer. I can flirt a little, but I've always been respectful and never pressured anything. After Linda asked for the divorce, I allowed myself to be free. I found I had some raw skill in flirting, and now that my inhibitions were gone, I discovered I didn't have to hold back. I wasn't the most handsome guy in the world, but I always had the ability to be witty, and I found that women seemed to like my humor and my bluntness. Linda saw me in action for the first time in a long time. I think it surprised her, but she must have realized that, long ago, the same moves and flirting had captured her heart. That night, I think that's what she remembered. She was silent the whole way home. I was silent too. Once home, we started to get ready for bed. Frank, where's your wedding ring? Linda asked me. In the sock drawer in the dresser, I replied. She walked over there, opened the drawer, extended her hand, grabbed the ring, and pulled it out. She looked at it, then looked at me. The weight of the symbol hit her, and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, it's yours," I said. "I think you should throw it away or sell it," I suggested. She looked at me. "What should I do with it?" she asked, stammering. "I think whatever you want. The ring is a symbol of our mutual love. Our marriage at some point was a shield, a warning that its owner was off limits to others. I highly doubt most people appreciate and recognize what this symbol means. I know. For me, this ring helped keep other women away. I hoped your ring would do the same for you since you changed your mind about surviving with me. I don't need this symbol to protect me anymore. It just reminds me of what once was," I explained. I looked her straight in the eye until she returned my gaze. "When the time comes, you'll decide what to do with this ring," I said. I moved closer to her and closed her fingers around the gold ring. "Frank, I'm about to fall asleep," Linda said when she called me. "Thanks for the night. I enjoyed the concert and chatting with you." "Call me," she added. I fell back asleep, and in the morning, breakfast awaited me. Linda had cooked bacon and eggs. She was a great cook, and I appreciated her efforts. I noticed Linda hadn't taken off her wedding and engagement rings. I also noticed she was touching them while eating with me that morning. Carol called me at work. "Carol, I'm surprised to hear from you. What can I do for you?" I asked. "Lunch today, 12:30 at Bohemia," she said, then hung up. I stared at the inactive receiver. I wasn't sure what to expect at lunch. I didn't know Carol very well. Linda became friends with her at work. She was pleasant to look at, but never very kind to me. She was one of Linda's friends that she often communicated with. I walked into the bar where I invited Jessica that first night. She was already sitting at the table, covered with a white tablecloth, and waved at me. Her face was tense and serious. The conversation probably wouldn't be pleasant. As soon as I sat down and took my order, Carol stared at me. "What are you plotting? Linda is suffering, and you're doing the stupid thing of going out with other women in front of her." I think I blushed. It was part embarrassment, part anger. I quickly closed my mouth before saying something I would regret later. I immediately realized that anything I said and did at lunch today would be immediately reported to Linda. She watched me as I regained control of my emotions. For a long time, I thought about how to respond. Finally, I spoke. "Carol, how much do you know about what's going on with Linda?" "I know her husband is acting like a total idiot," Carol grunted. "People around us were watching." "Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly, and I'll answer yours." "I have nothing to hide," I said. "She's confused," Carol admitted. "Confused enough to go out with other men to clear her thoughts?" I asked. Carol blushed and took a sip of water. "We're trying to help her understand it," Carol responded. "You see, dear Carol, this is where I make an exception because you and your friends are responsible for helping her figure things out between her and her husband," I said. Carol fell silent. "Seriously, why do you care at all?" "Linda is my friend, and what I said is that she should be her best friend, her partner, her life companion. Don't you think if she had any problems, she should have talked to me first? Don't you think she should have come to me to fix things? Instead of going to her friends who apparently are so good and responsible they take her to places where she can figure out her feelings with other men who don't seem to mind kissing someone else's wife?" Carol paled slightly. She didn't get too pale, but it seemed she didn't have much appetite now. Somehow, Carol opened the floodgates of my anger. This was another stupid friend deciding to meddle in other people's affairs. "Let me ask you something. Are you married?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Have you ever been married?" I asked. Another no. "Do you have any counseling degrees?" I asked. "No," she replied. "So what gives you the right to give marriage advice to anyone? You've never been married. So how do you know what it's like? What gives you the right to meddle with someone else's marriage?" I said. She gasped. "But I'm her friend," Carol responded. No. From where I am sitting, how many times have you talked to me?" "Once or twice, as I remember." I have been married to Linda for 15 years. But when have you dedicated time in your life to get to know, talk, and understand your male friends and colleagues? I have been in her life for 15 years, so I know her like no one else. You talk about advice, you talk about helping her with this, but what do you know about me aside from what Linda has told you from her point of view? I felt Carol was about to cry. I approached her as best I could to pass on a message to her, and through her, to Linda. Carol. Linda told me how she felt. She wanted a divorce. She told me, and I quote, "I don't love you anymore." Well, Carol, tell me, how should I react to this? What possible argument can I give her to say that she is wrong? Well, she was the one who wanted the divorce. Why should I be miserable waiting for her to change her mind? I finished my drink. My food was half eaten, but I had already finished. I stood up and took one last look at Carol. I discovered that other women see something in me, but my wife no longer does. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I won't cancel my life because my partner is confused and no longer wants me. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about it is her business. I no longer try to convince her or tell her how she should feel. Now, I can accept it. With that final statement, I walked away before Carol could say anything more. I knew that as soon as I left the restaurant, she would be on the phone with Linda. At that moment, I had a lot to think about. That night, I was going to meet Janet. Everything went very well with Janet. Janet was different from the others. She was a younger black woman than me, but very beautiful. We were very polite and civilized when she joined our group at first. But there was a moment a few months later when I was telling a rather risque joke to some guys, when Janet walked into the room behind me to hear my punchline, which was quite striking. The men around me noticed and all held their breath. When I turned to see her surprised face, I smiled at her with a slightly mischievous grin and said, "Admit it, this is as true as it is funny." She stood there for a moment, with an expression of, "I can't believe this white guy just said that." And then she burst out laughing with me. From that moment on, she became one of the guys. But at the end of my date with her, she was a real woman. Janet allowed me to go farther than my other dates. And in the end, I was the one who rejected her offer to stay the night. As much as I wanted to, there were issues with Linda that needed to be resolved before I could sleep with another woman. "Frank," Linda asked when I got into bed. "Yes, Frank, I need you to shower for what?" It was dark. The lights were off. But Linda's voice cracked. It made me shiver. "Please, Frank, if you don't shower, I'll have to ask you to go to the guest room to sleep." I was confused. What's going on? I turned on the bedside lamp and saw my wife. Her face was red, and her eyes were wet. She couldn't look me in the eyes. "Please, Frank, can you come back to our bed? But please, I ask you to shower." "What's wrong?" "I always shower, darling. You know that." She turned away from me, spun her whole body away from me. "You smell like her." "Who?" "I had Janet's scent on me. Yes, I got out of bed feeling like garbage." I looked at her. She was still turned away from me. "I'm sorry, I didn't understand." "Look, if you want me to go to the guest room, I can do it. Number, I want you back in our bed. It's just that, Frank, I can't stand the fact that you smell like someone else. I just can't. I want you in our bed. It's enough to know that you are seeing other people. I can pretend you're going out with guys. I can ignore my friends telling me who they saw you with. I could even meet them, like that girl Geeter, and tell myself they're just friends. But now I know. I can smell her. I can say, I want you back in our bed, but only after you shower. I can't stand her smell on you." I approached the side of the bed, didn't stop, leaned over, and kissed her forehead. "I'm really sorry if I wasn't very attentive. Let me shower, and I'll come back to our bed." The next morning, it was Saturday, and I stayed asleep. It had been a long week for me. Going out every night made me realize my age. I hoped I wouldn't catch a cold or something. Linda woke me up with breakfast, then asked me what my plans were. "I don't have anything for the weekend," I told her. Frank was still sitting at the kitchen table. What? He reached into his pocket and pulled out something. He approached me, knelt down in front of me, opened his palm, and inside I saw my wedding ring. He took my hand and looked at me. Frank, I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I haven't thought it through carefully. Gently, he started placing the ring on my finger. I let him. I still love you. He was kneeling, waiting for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. Do you feel this way? He nodded. No divorce? He nodded vigorously again. What about other men? There's no one else but you. That's all for you now. Here's the delicate part. Probably everyone will think I'm crazy for this, but I went ahead anyway. You must understand that I will continue to go out with other women from time to time. Linda swallowed. We stayed like that for a long time, our gazes meeting. Through this whole process, I learned something about my wife. I was sure of the outcome. Finally, she nodded. I guess it shouldn't surprise me, she said. I think I'm in love with you too. I told her, grabbed her, and kissed her. I kissed her deeply. She kissed me back. It turned out, Linda had low self-esteem. I treated her well. Well, not exactly. Over the years, we grew apart from each other. My biggest mistake was not recognizing how she felt. Every time she told me how she felt, I contradicted her. You know how damaging this is. What arrogance does one have to tell another person that how they feel isn't true? All I did was build up her resentment and hostility toward me over time. I pushed her to the point where she stopped appreciating what she had. Suddenly, maybe it's my fault, but over time, we changed. Well, she changed. I never changed. So, why would I want to go back to being who I was before? I played guessing games. She wanted me to return, but we had both changed. Now I knew there were others behind the scenes, ready to replace her if she chose to go her own way. You have to go out with others, she complained. I'm not going to go out with other men. I looked at her and smiled. Yes, I will from time to time. She may be my wife, but I am your husband. Don't forget this, and I won't forget you. She smiled. Yes, she smiled. Take me to bed and show me what I've been missing. Show me what all these other girls were getting from you. Do you think you have what I need? I asked. I'll only show you my love. And maybe it will tire you so much that you won't have the strength for any other woman. I picked her up and took her to the bedroom. I laid her down on the bed, and we both took our clothes off with a sense of urgency that almost bordered on panic. Our passion exploded. When I took her, then she took me. Then she took me again. At some point along the way, she realized by my resistance that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. After 15 years, my wife knows what I can do in bed. She had a knowing smile for the rest of the day. I didn't say anything. What happened on my dates was a topic I didn't mention. She didn't either. It was an episode in our lives that's best left in the past. For my part, I don't ask her about the men she kissed and talked to. My wife now looks at me with some admiration and respect. I never would have believed my plan would work. At first, it wasn't a very good plan. It was just too stubborn to give her the pleasure of seeing how she would destroy her husband with her words, teeth, and request for a divorce. When I saw how she reacted and accepted the fact that I was seeing other women while she stayed home waiting for me, I took my plan further. I got her back by distancing myself from her. What you don't have is what you most desire. What you have is what you desire least. These are the words I live by now. After liberating her and myself, we are closer than ever. So I am going out with other people. I haven't had to do it yet. The first sign that Linda is returning to how she was will lead to my next date. I know it, she knows it, and together we work to not only listen to each other but understand each other. Are you still here? Interesting. In that case, I suggest you subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and comment on where in the world you listen to this story from. Let's see where everyone is from.